Okay, here we are. Hello and welcome. Happy New Year to our InterReach community. Thank you all for joining us today as we continue our series, I Want to Be a Professional Aero When I Grow Up, Pathways and Opportunities for a New Workforce. We're covering a range of topics, examining where we are collectively in establishing and advancing the field of connective and integrative scholarly work. We kicked off this series by framing our work in the context of integration and implementation sciences, or I2S, the field that was coalesced by Gabrielle Bammer. And from there, we have moved to hear from AEROs in academia, both on the faculty and staff sides of the house. And now we're going on a tour in search of AEROs and other habitats. And today we are joined by 3 AEROs who have launched independent endeavors, including consultancies and nonprofits, to facilitate, support, and create knowledge. And I just want to say on a personal note, every time I interact with these 3, I am struck by their capacities to vision and bring clarity to the state of the scientific and research enterprises. And we, just a little bit of a logistical thing where they've decided to go in order based on when they started their organization. So we will start with Kennan and then move to Hannah and Anne. And before, because I forgot until right now, before we get into the bio, pass it over to our speakers. Does anyone have any announcements that they need to make before we move into the meat of this session? Okay, well, if anyone does, please go ahead and put it in the chat. That would be great. Okay, so we'll be starting with Kennan this morning. So Kennan Salinero is the principal founder of ReImagine Science, founded in 2008 to change the way we do science in the United States. Her research in cell biology, protein chemistry, and genomics occurred both within and outside of academia as faculty and as a research specialist at several national labs and as a scientific specialist at Celera Genomics. So that's just a tasting of all the things that Kennan has done. After Kennan, we will be hearing from Dr. Hannah Love, who is the co-founder of Divergent Science, LLC. She has been facilitating since 2010 in various areas, including higher education, water conflict, and science facilitation. Since 2015, she has been using her skills in higher education to design team science trainings. As a scholar, she publishes Science of Team Science Studies using social network analysis of teams. And then finally, we will hear from Anne Heberger Marino, who is the Associate Director of the University of Maine Portland Gateway. She founded her own company, Lean-To Collaborations, in 2020. Previously, she was a Senior Program Director for the National Academy's Keck Future Initiatives, or NACFI, which developed a model for fostering interdisciplinary research collaboration. Anne has probably been an AERO all her life and has been involved in science of team science in the science of team science community since 2008. So those are our 3 wonderful speakers. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Kennan to kick us off. Thanks, Kennan.
All right, thank you so much, Christine. And I'm trying to keep an eye on a timer here and a couple of notes. So here we go. And I too am really excited about what we'll be doing, and I hope I can drive my computer all right. Nope, obviously not. There we go. All right, it did a little glitch on this side, but I think I'm great. So I'm going to start with what drew me to science, and then in our brief overview of how alt-ac positions have been framed in various contexts, I'm going to talk about a few contexts of being in and outside of science. So what drew me to science was when I was 11, I was staying with my grandmother in Phoenix, and there was an obituary for a 14-year-old who had passed from leukemia. And so I think from that point on, I wanted to understand not only how systems and human biological systems work, but how to fix them. So one of the things I'm going to journey through in my brief presentation is when have I been a scientist and when haven't I been? And I made this quick graphic that the bottom part is supposed to look a little bit like Rutherford's raisins and pudding atomic model, and that represents science. And I've wandered through science where I've been thoroughly in it, and then I've been out of it, but never far from it. And recently, I did an exercise with 17 and 18-year-olds in West Virginia for the National Youth Science Academy, where we positioned ourselves next to this fire pit in the middle as to whether we were in science or outside of science in our life and in our life journeys. Of course, theirs were early in their journey, but it was a really interesting exercise. We actually did something about science communication, if you want to ask me about that during the discussion. But I started pretty thoroughly in science with my PhD work on the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, looking at disulfide structure function. And then I changed areas to another one that I found very interesting, protein translocation, or how proteins get across the membrane in the rough endoplasmic reticulum. This was my postdoc, so I learned a new field. And then I took that field with me as I became faculty in the Department of Chemistry at Georgetown. And I was one of only two, being the second female ever in that department. I launched out of that due to a tragic loss of my husband of almost 20 years while I was on faculty, and it just wasn't sustainable to stay in that environment with our two children that I was responsible for and just keeping centered in life. So amazingly, one day I came home and there was an offer for a job on my answering machine that I hadn't applied for, and it was with Salinero Genomics. And so I got to work on the human genome, which I loved. And I would say this is the first time I wasn't right next to the fire pit, but a bit away from it, because I was a scientific specialist explaining the science, and I got to do beta testing, but I wasn't doing the science per se. Then I got back to doing the science. I loved the annotation software that was used. I was really intrigued by it, especially since I was a protein chemist by training. And so I did the whole sequencing and annotation of this soil microbe at Joint Genome Institute in Berkeley. And I put in the footnote there, and trouble. That was the instigation, partly, of what happened next, because life happened again personally, and also trouble at Berkeley. My work was stolen from me. I stole it back. I was able to publish it. But I realized science wasn't really working for me and for a lot of things, including genomic data, including the postdoc community, including a lot of things around what society gets out of science and what scientists do for themselves. But I realized during a self-development and discovery workshop that as a scientist, I was built for working with a team. I felt very much science was a team event. But in an exercise where we were responsible for everybody being on time, and I was sitting there on time and seeing the people that weren't and thinking, thank goodness I'm not one of them, I suddenly realized I was built in an environment where others had to fail for me to succeed. 600 applicants for my faculty position had to fail for me to get it. Grants the same way, though I was in the failure category for those. So I'm going to give a really quick overview in my last 2 minutes here. Hopefully not breakneck speed, but what have I done? What gave rise to ReImagine Science was basically that. Science wasn't working for me, and I could see science wasn't working for itself. So we do signature events. We started in 2010 at the Science USA Science and Engineering Festival, doing an Unsummit. We do third space events, which are interactive dialogues. We do partnerships. I help host events. This was at the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, where I set up the relationship for it. And a dear friend who worked with the Office of Science and Technology does global collab networks, which we did a number of over the years. We sponsor and support other groups. She's Geeky is one of them. I've learned a lot from the tech sector, as a previous presentation of this platform has shared. Recently, Ocean Memory Project as well. K-12 education. I've had a really interesting collaboration with somebody who was in charge of the education system in California for a number of years, looking at alternative careers, because I'm very interested in how science interacts both with the domain called science and the domains outside of science, because I think science really is everywhere, and I want to see the partitions fall. Sibling organizations like Liberating Structures. TEDx we found to be a very good platform. So I've helped produce a number of TEDx's. I've been involved in the TED community, have done workshops at this event in Edinburgh. And then ULab, which Anne is very familiar with. And it is about a particular process of changing for the future, learning from what's called the field of the future by Otto Scharmer. And we've done that in the Science of Team Science community. We've also done a learning journey where we split off from the ULab learning journeys. And I'll end with that we did a 2-year online learning journey with people from Stanford and Berkeley and various institutions, including Canadian ones. It lasted a long time online, and then it launched into a World Science Forum presentation in a new area that we're working in, which is Indigenous knowledge and the interface between that and Western science, and what can be learned and what can be merged between the two. So yeah, I just want to say the two things. What have I truly enjoyed? I truly enjoyed learning about proteins and their structure and protein folding and really getting into how proteins fold. I just love that. What am I still trying to figure out? Who makes work? All this work that we have to do in science or not, who creates these jobs and decides what we're doing? And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Hannah.
Thanks so much, Kennan. Do we have any quick questions before we move on to Hannah? Okay, feel free to put them in the chat if they're still percolating, and we'll get to them at the end of the session. Okay, Hannah.
All right, so I chose not to use slides. I kept trying to think like, what would be a good visual? And it was like, I just kept kind of coming up short, and I was like, 7 minutes, I'm starting my timer. I think I'm just gonna do 7 minutes with no slides. So here we go. So our first prompt was what drew each of us to science. And I'm trained as a sociologist. And I'm a sociologist because of where I grew up. And if you know me at all, you know that I love to talk about growing up in Kansas. And I actually grew up in rural Southwest Kansas in Dodge City. So when someone says, get the hell out of Dodge, I'm from Dodge. And when I say I'm from Dodge and I say like, get the hell out of Dodge, it came from like the Old West gunfights where people would be like, get out of Dodge with like their little pistols. It's like all over TV. So what people think about is like the gunfights and farming and agriculture. And I actually grew up in an immigrant community and a very poor immigrant community. And I was fascinated by the social injustices that I saw, the inequality that I saw. And I grew up in a minority or majority historically disenfranchised population high school. And we had social justice training because we had issues. And so when I went to college and took a sociology class, I was like, oh my gosh, this answers questions that I have about the world. And that was where it sent me on this trajectory to eventually get a PhD in sociology. But what I think is more relevant is how I came to team science. I identify as a facilitator, a professional facilitator. And in 2015, I was working on a USDA grant to do facilitation about Colorado water conflict, specifically water in the West. And water in the West is more about quantity than quality. And I was like, there are no answers to this. It just seemed like an impossible task. And that same year I met with my first scientific team and I went, oh my gosh, they have problems and I have ideas how to solve this, because it just seems so much easier than water in the West. So that's where I've landed myself today, is facilitating, doing trainings, workshops, facilitation, social network analysis with scientific teams. So what I've learned that I truly enjoy is when teams have aha moments. And this aha moment, or like that moment of brilliance, it might happen when I share social network data, or it might happen during a science facilitation, or it might happen during a training. But it's how do I get teams to have that breakthrough moment where you see it in your eyes, you feel it in the room, and you know that this just happened. And I'm really interested in how do you get there? And our final prompt is about Like, what am I still trying to figure out? And so this is one of the things that I'm still constantly trying to do better and constantly still trying to figure out. And we know that these aha moments happen after teams go through what Tuckman would call the grown zone, what Kara Hall has those arrows in the middle of her 4 stages of team development. Grown zone, storming. Oh, grown zone. Kaner would call it grown zone. Tuckman, storming. I had a client one time call it creative puberty, and I just loved the visual that I got in my mind. But we know you go through this period of discomfort and then you come out and like that's when it happens. And so how do we get teams through that? And I always can, when as a facilitator, I can draw on the board. I'm like, we're in the grown zone now. It's uncomfortable. Like, we know we're here. Like, we know it. And then we get out of it and they're like, look, we're in the clear now. Like, we've got it. But I continue to be fascinated about getting from the grown zone to that really powerful aha moment. So our last question, which ties in, is what am I still trying to figure out? And I think conflict, clearly, like grown zone, storming, all of those imply an element of conflict. And so I'm very interested in the role of conflict and the role conflict has in getting to our aha moments. And when you do social justice training, cross-cultural communication training, they always say you need to tolerate pain for growth. And they say it's painful to recognize your privilege. Like, there's a certain amount of discomfort you have to go through. And I find that with my teams too. I wear the same hat when I facilitate social justice work, when I do teams, because you go through that period of conflict. And so I continue to like think about how do we get through that? Kind of tangentially related, but I wrote it down, and so I'm going to cover it. The other thing that I'm very interested in, which is similar but different, is why teams fail. What's going on when a team doesn't make it? Because we've all been on those teams that were like, okay, they've done the work, or we think they've done the work, but then it doesn't catalyze, it doesn't happen. And maybe they don't have a leader, maybe their network never got together, maybe somebody went on sabbatical. Like, so often there's a reason. But I just continue to be fascinated when I see a team that doesn't make it. And I think the caring person in me is like, okay, what could we have done to make that better? So with that, I've got just a little bit of time left. I'll take some questions if we've got them.
Thanks, Hannah. I love the visual of creative puberty. That was perfect.
Right.
Any questions from the group? All right. Well, with that, then we will pass it over to Anne. Thanks so much, Hannah.
Okay, I get the tough job of following these two amazing people, but it is the job I signed up for willingly. So I'm going to start by giving you this pretty picture, which hopefully you see like a rainbow on your screen. And I want to ask everybody to just bring to mind, what is your favorite color? What happens if I tell you the answer has to be blue? I can see Christine Glauber laughing. It's ridiculous, right? I mean, this is how I feel whenever I hear the narrative of the only way to be a functioning member of an academic society is to be a tenured professor. It's very silly, and thank you for coming to my 30-second TED Talk on alt-ac careers. So that's all I have to say about that. The way I got into science was as an undergraduate. I was a psychology student. Are my slides advancing? Okay, good. As an undergraduate psychology student, I was really fortunate to be in a lab with someone who did really amazing science and cared deeply about creating a positive team culture for her students. This was a psychology lab that studied the psychological effects of television, and our most important piece of lab equipment was a really hideous and beloved green couch. So I think my career has really always been about trying to create that feeling for other people in research teams. It was kind of a surprise to me, the naivety of being 20 years old, that all research labs didn't work that way. and not all professors were able to create the kind of culture that ours did. So what gave rise to my business is a bit of a time warp back to the National Academies. We had done a lot of work on developing a model for how to bring people together and then give them money to do new scientific projects. And the idea was that most of the time we thought that they would kind of be off and running and they would come up against some challenges, but they would mostly be able to get over those things. But then there was also these institutional barriers that our program was supposed to do something about, these structural barriers. There was a systemic change kind of aspect to the program. And what I found on the as an evaluator is that some of the teams kind of fell off a cliff. Back to what Hannah was saying about what makes them fail. And so I got really curious about that, and science of team science was happening. I was like, well, there's all these things that we know about how to not fall into a pit and not wind up in sort of dangerous team zones. So I got very, very interested in that question. And around 2016, the program that I was running, I wasn't running it yet, but they decided to sunset the program, and I stepped in as the director. So I was in charge of sort of seeing the end of this thing that I helped to build for a really long time. And another one of those sort of step into the role, not really knowing what's going on, and how that was going to proceed. But it was not a secret that the program was ending. There were all sorts of reasons for that. And I knew when that was coming, and what people told me and my team was that you're going to get scooped up. And long story short, we did not get scooped up. No one scooped me up while the program was sunsetting. So I had the gift of being able to figure out what to do with myself in 2019. And because I worked from home, my whole life went with the rhythm of that program. So it was very much a feeling of being untethered, and I needed to kind of relearn what I was interested in, what kind of work I wanted to do going forward while trying to find a new income source. And I got to a decision point where the Ocean Memory Project, which Kennan just mentioned, they were one of the projects that we funded in the last year of NACFE. They had an opportunity for me to come on in a consulting role. And it was really at the very beginning of the pandemic, it was just sort of whispering. This was about February of 2020. And it was really that point of, do I go one way or do I go another? So that was when I started my company. So I wanted to talk about being intentional around teamwork. I wanted us not to wing it when it came to how we work as teams. And I think that's part of why some of the teams fail, is they're just they're winging it and they think it'll be okay. But I also had this sense of that teams were really being asked to operate at a different level and to do different things than they had in the past, with the diversity of partners and types of knowledge and the pressure for innovation. And I really wanted to be a bridge from where teams were to where they wanted to get to. So I did some training in team coaching and started using a diagnostic called the Team Diagnostic Survey. That's a team level of effectiveness. I didn't see anyone really doing that, but I really wanted to work alongside teams. So that was kind of what I built the trajectory of my company around. It was really important to me that I was not going to be competing with my friends and colleagues that were working in this space. It just doesn't make any more sense to me than blue is the only color to compete with my colleagues and friends to help people collaborate. It's just like makes my brain hurt. And I think what organizations like ours bring is a different perspective, maybe the ability to ask some different questions. Sometimes we can push boundaries that you might not be able to do internally. I know I certainly found that as an internal evaluator. There were things I needed external people to be able to ask about. What's changed, obviously, is now I'm back in the academy, but I've kept the structure on my website alive because I'm just sort of holding on to what that might become. I'm not actively working or seeking new business because I'm here at the Gateway with Pips, and Pips is speaking in a couple of weeks, so come back for her webinar. I think she'll tell you more about what we've got going on down here. But it was a really big identity shift for me to start a business, and I didn't want to let it go. So what Magic is for me is about bringing play. I love the facilitation piece so much because there's so much we can bring to that. And also some mindfulness and presence and slowing things down, I think, is potentially magical. I've been talking about different as the new. I don't know if I coined that, but that's kind of how I'm thinking about it, that when we bring something different into a space, that can really be new enough. Kind of borrowing Kennan's visual of the fire pit, I think there's things about being in the academy and academic culture that certainly keep us warm and help us flourish in the world and help the world flourish. But if we get too close and we're right on top of it, it has the ability to burn us. And so being embedded with more and more research teams, I've really started thinking about the ways in which the culture kind of hurts us. So I've been doing some advanced facilitation training on a process that sort of helps us feel gratitude for where we are, but also sort of connect to some of the pain that exists in our culture and then in academic culture and kind of the results that we actually get from that. And then moves us forward, like how do we go forth from that and what else can we do instead? Done.
Wow, thank you so much, Anne. And gosh, I am just struck by the creativity of the three of you and just your a common theme that I'm hearing is conflict and failure, right? But the three of you have just come out on the other side, built bridges, and have a vision for moving forward. And thank you guys so much for sharing those visions. And I see there's a couple of questions in the chat. I'll start with Darius's. It's for Hannah, but I'm also curious about Anne's perspective, given what you just shared at the very end. But in your experience, what's an overlapping yet surprising connection between team science and social justice?
Okay, so much. There are two that are at the tip of my tongue. So the first one is all about psychological safety. And when people feel more psychologically safe, I think they're able to dig deeper inside them and understand more about their privilege. But the parallel of that in science is understanding the pitfalls of your science and how someone else's science can fill in that pitfall, and really having that realization that your science might not be able to answer all the questions, but somebody else's can. And that is so hard for us as scientists because we've spent our entire careers learning this. So to me, that's the first one. Oh, I had a second one. I wrote the first one in the chat. I didn't write the second one in the chat. I'm trying to blank. Does someone else want to go and give me a moment just to recall what I was thinking? Oh, diversity. It's about diversity. So I think diversity, literature on diversity on teams, depending on if you're in like the business world or where you go, there is literature out there that says diversity on teams is detrimental to the team. And as a facilitator, that's something I disagree with. I think it takes longer and it takes more work as the facilitator to create the psychological safety and the foundation necessary to hear those diverse perspectives. But in the long run, the team is better for it. And I see diversity in the field of science and team science being defined in lots of different ways, like a whole spectrum, everything from like discipline to age to role to like we are the alt arrow that's like not the real arrow, but the arrow, in addition to like gender, race, ethnicity, things we would think about.
Kennan, I think you were maybe going to add something there as another connection between team science and social justice.
Yeah, and I feel confident that Anne will too. So yes, so first I do want to say I'm in Salisbury, North Carolina. I'm going to be here for a while. I'm dealing with a family affair, and any of you that are on the Eastern Seaboard, I'm planning to travel to places as far away as Illinois. So just know that if you want to invite me to come visit for a collaboration or just to see what's cooking. So on the long drive here, I re-listened to Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And I think that one of the greatest gifts and biggest stumbling blocks, maybe, I don't know, it's probably not one of the greatest, but in science is when people have a really great experience in science, because they don't realize that that's not a given. And so just in the spirit of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, I do think we're at a time in society where all of society is having to face the dynamics of living on this planet as humans at this period in time when we've had such hierarchies that cause harm. And so I just think that that's true in science as it is in everything else.
You both covered that so well. And I think that when we think about creating excellent teams and important science, the skills that we learn from there apply very well to DEI and justice work and back and forth. And how that shows up is different depending on our sort of intersectionality and our privilege. But it's really, to me, it all, at least in my experience, it all goes back to being very aware as much as I can about how I'm showing up, the results that I'm creating, the consequences and ripple effects of that I may or may not be aware of, and how we create systems that give us that information and feedback in a way that we can improve what we're doing as we go along.
And do you want to answer Bethany's question about, oh, actually, sorry, you just did. I missed that. Okay, great. It's in the chat. Amalia is asking, can you all describe a major learning moment, for example, a failure or misstep from the early days of striking out on your own, something that has stuck with you as a defining moment?
Well, I can start with that one. I did not use my friends and colleagues well. I probably would not have had to start my business had I known that Hannah was starting first, or other people that I came to know were already doing this. I probably would not have had to do this on my own and make it all up as I went along. I did a lot of business training on marketing and all the pieces that a person needs to have to run a business. And I think it would have been so much easier for me if I had just flown up, a flag and said to 10 people that I know would have helped me, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do with myself. The solution probably would have come from that.
I'll jump in. There's so many. I can't isolate one in particular, but I'm going to spin this and talk about the beauty of it, being out on your own. And because I'm not at an institution, I tell clients this all the time. I'm not institution bound. I can pivot, I can change, I can make small adjustments for you. And that's how I feel about our business too. So when things go wrong, I'm like, well, that didn't work. And then we just sidestep and keep moving forward. And this has been my full-time job for over 3 years. And so I feel this immense pressure that it has to work. And part of it, having to work, is being flexible and just being like, whoop, that didn't go as way I planned. Let's try again. And because we're client-based, if we didn't price things right, or the contract got funky with one client, it's just one client. We're going to move on to the next client. And that's really the beauty of our business model also, is that we have a lot of room because of the diversity of clients and the diversity of things that we offer as a business. Did I get all that? I think there might have been a follow-up question come here.
I think Christine's follow-up question kind of, you touched on that.
Cool.
Yeah, and I can jump in too.
Great.
Yeah, I had to think about this for a few minutes, but luckily, Anne and Hannah, you were really great in giving your experience and path, and it prompted me to realize right now I'm involved with 2 communities that are trying to reinvent themselves. One is the Ocean Memory Project, and the other is a Global Learning Exchange Network. And it's been really interesting to sit somewhat on the sidelines and somewhat in a facilitation or guidance role and be reminded, one, how important facilitation and facilitators are. There's no question. But it had me dust off some old material. My creation of ReImagine Science, which started as Yamana Science and Technology, actually came out of a 2-year-long, very intense program. And all of those aspects of iterative learning and outside eyes and coaching, et cetera, were part of that program. And I dusted off, I'm just going to name them really quickly because I just suddenly remembered them, which I'm kind of impressed with myself because I was thinking about it and I couldn't until just this moment. But there's a 5-step program, 5-step sort of template of creating a possibility from nothing, who's who on the team, including roles, background of relatedness, feasible opportunities, like who are the people and things that you need to bring onto your plate and into the project, and then completion, always completion. And completion that's the reason I dusted it off, because in this group, we're looking at agreements, community agreements, and completion in the way that this particular training is to not let things sit and fester between you and others on the team. So those structures helped me to miss many of those pitfalls that I absolutely would have stepped into. And by the way, I do now because I'm not using that structure as rigorously as I would like to be. So that's my answer.
Great. And I see there's quite a bit of chat going on about failures in team science. And Kennan, I apologize. I didn't realize that there was a SIG, a site. I think it's within the Science of Team Science Insights Network. Okay, that's wonderful to hear. And thank you for sharing some more info about that, and to Hannah and Bethany for pointing out the failures in interdisciplinarity. Oh, what is a SIG? A special interest group. Great. Other questions? Apologies if I'm missing any. The chat is moving quite a bit, so feel free to unmute and ask your question as well. Christine.
I was wondering if I could sort of poke at the business model piece just a slight bit, because I bet you there's a lot of people on the call that are interested in thinking, oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. The content, the feelings, the ambition, and the, like mission all resonate, but the logistics are going to be individualized for every person's situation. But if you could talk about, what were some of the steps? Did you make the leap all at once? Do you feel like there, in talking to other people who have done this, could you just speak to the logistics of going from not your own institution to inventing something? I wonder if it seems like there might be interest in understanding that some more.
I put some of my answer in chat, and I know Bethany talked when she was on the panel about, the importance of having a legal structure. I think if I were to do this again, I just before I joined the university had spent 3 months redoing my entire business plan on how I wanted to do the work, because I learned so much about the types of clients and projects that made me feel like I was doing my best work and the things that didn't. So there's pieces of this that, especially if you're doing this on your own, we need to learn skills in marketing. We need to learn sort of skills in communication. We need to learn how to delegate. We need to figure out what's essential. I did a bunch of work with a coach who actually worked in the online marketing space. But what she was really talking about was how to set up systems that allow the business to run with less friction. And I did a lot of work with her on mindset, because it was a huge identity shift to go from working at the National Academy of Sciences to, hi, it's Anne. It was really a big deal. And so I had a lot of work that I needed to do just to kind of process. Like, there were people who wouldn't answer my emails anymore when I was just me. And that was a tough thing to take. So that was some of the work that I had to do. A lot of it for me was around mindset, on putting myself out there, promoting what I was doing, championing the things that I thought were important, because I didn't have a thing behind me. It was just me saying this. And that took a while to kind of figure out. And then the mechanics of all the, like, how do I install WordPress and get Elementor to work? And what's my branding? Like, all of that was it felt like a lot for me, because I didn't have a partner. Hannah did a much better job of it.
Yeah, that question's so big. So I'm just going to say, if anybody wants to have conversations about how to start a small business and has like more specific questions, I have my shirt on. Oh, that's not a good angle. There you go. Divergent Science, Team Divergent Science. If you Google us, if you Google Team Science Consulting, you can find us, and I'm happy to like meet with you one-on-one and chat about how to start a small business. Yeah, I just saw it as something that like, I didn't get a PhD thinking I was going to do this, but at some point during my PhD, I realized I was making a lot of money consulting. And I started at the beginning of my second master's degree getting paid quite a bit as a graduate student to do program evaluations. So I had this level of expertise under mentorship of working with external clients doing program evaluations. And so I got to observe that client academic relationship for a couple of years under mentorship before I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do. Like, this is working for me and this is where I want to go. But I think I've also just kind of have a business mindset. So I love politics and campaigns, and I love starting things. And as a grad student, one of the things Ellen's my business partner. So Ellen Fisher, my business partner, we created a graduate program together. And so I just kind of saw this as a campaign, as creating a new project, as building a team. And so I used those skills and that knowledge I already had to prioritize like what needed to happen first to get clients in the door and how things were going to fall into place. And that worked for us. And I still have a lot of, both of us, Ellen and I, have a lot of mystery behind like, how did this, like, it's working, like, how does it work? And we don't do a ton of advertising. Most of our advertising is word of mouth, some things on listservs. We have a lot of repeat clients, and everything, you know, we just take advantage of every opportunity, and it adds up to a successful business.
Yeah, and I'll jump in that there's something I call a niggling, when there's something inside that isn't quite sitting right. That seems to be often the seed for someone changing, going out and doing something new. For me, I was actually doing a project. I was at Berkeley at the time, and I was in one of these self-development programs that was several months around project-based, work. And I thought I would do a project around outcomes for women in STEM, because I knew that my graduating class at UCSD for PhDs had been a match set of female and male, and all my male counterparts, I'm good friends with many of them. Faculty positions are doing really well, and the female ones, Florence and I, we were just talking this morning actually. We were the only two of the only three that went for tenure track, and it didn't go the same way. And so and at the time they were doing a big study at Berkeley, and I got involved with one of the leaders of that. But the niggling for me on that was that it was a systemic issue, and it wasn't just affecting women, it affects men too in a different way. So I got very interested in systems change and systems thinking. As you pointed out, it really helped. I went to the president's office at Berkeley to ask if I could use my Berkeley email when I was reaching out to people. And I was in the Bay Area at the time, and it was odd because about 2 out of every 3 people turned out to be in the area when I'd reach out to them. But having my Berkeley email address, I think really helped. I think that hierarchy is very much present in science. And in case you're interested, I have the link here for Blessed Unrest by Martha Graham, which speaks to, and there's a whole book that was one of our initiatory readings by Stephen Hawking about Blessed Unrest and the rise of nonprofits. Also, if we want to have a discussion, there's a dynamic between consultancies and change from within that is a really structural dynamic and a really interesting space that's being explored by ReImagine Science, but also by people that are doing major consulting in the tech sector. And I think it's an interesting conversation if anyone's interested.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that actually, Kennan. Everything that everybody's talked about sounds like academics or nonprofit work, maybe foundations, which I guess are nonprofits. So, what does industry do? Like Merck or Pfizer? I'm a chemist by training, so I think about those folks, right? Like, do they care about this? Do they have people that do what you do, but they make a bunch of money just inside the company? Or do they hire folks like you all? What's the industry connection like? And you mentioned tech, but I think like physical scientists, hard science, engineering type folks as well.
I think I can answer that fairly quickly, and then I'll hand it off if Hannah and Anne want to step into. So there were 2 places that we looked at where large conglomerations or entities have the means to look at performance. And so the military is one. They've done tons of studies around team performance over many years, and they do a lot around supporting the person, the individual, but also industry. And so, for instance, somebody that does a lot of consulting with Pfizer is the one that told me about open space the first time, or that they used it actually at Pfizer. I think it was actually someone else that told me about it, now that I think about it. But those entities do use facilitators, and I know several other facilitators that are hired, and there's a very rich and strong consultancy, and it also lives in the domain of IDEO and PricewaterhouseCooper, and there's several others. If you just start reading Harvard Business Review, you'll start seeing that community.
I'll jump in here. Oh, nope.
Oh, I'm just putting more resources in the chat. I think academia is somewhat unusual that we don't have more embedded people doing this kind of work. The people that I was in my team coach training with were in financial services firms. One of them worked at a Navy shipyard. They're in healthcare, they're in education, they're in all of these other fields. And I think we've kind of put some of this into team science to fix it. But why are our university presidents not getting executive coaching? Like, why is that not a conversation that's happening? I think a lot of that academia has kind of done a little, some of this and some of that, adopting business practices, but the real development of leaders and teams is not something that we have done very well. There's no way in most companies that you would get somebody who'd run a $1 million project and then give them a $120 million project and say, good luck. We're giving you very little to do that.
Our business works almost exclusively with institutions of higher education. And I think it's because my background, I have a background in higher ed, and then Ellen, my business partner, she's also a chemist by training, and she's the vice president for research at the University of New Mexico, although the lawyers make us say that she does not consult in that capacity. So a lot of our friends and connections are through higher ed, and we feel particularly comfortable being in higher ed settings because of our backgrounds and where we are. we always talk about like, oh, what would that look like to go into industry? But maybe someday. Right now it's nonprofits, higher ed, little military here and there.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, I don't have a question as much as I just wanted to thank the speakers for sharing their journey, because it's been very inspiring, and seeing how you've kind of followed your heart, needing to for different reasons and wanting to for different reasons. So, and this latest discussion about just kind of how to take that next step, it's very inspiring. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
The other thing I wanted to, when you were saying that, Carl, I was sort of joking about like, what is your favorite color? But like, is your favorite color now the same favorite color you had when you were 10? It might have changed. I remember when red was my favorite color, and then it was purple, and now I tend to go with teal. And we can have our careers do that too. That just because we've decided one thing doesn't mean we can't decide something else. And we can remember that in the moments that we're lucky enough to remember that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I've been in academics for a while, and I don't want to say that I'm stuck in academia, but in some ways it kind of feels like, how would I function effectively outside of that? Because that's what I know most. So this has been really very inspiring.
Well, I want to say that brings to mind Anne's picture with the bridge. My experience is that, and that's why I wonder who makes work, is that if you're in academia, it actually, I've been involved in a lot of the startup boot camps and such. It's really hard actually to set up the structure to be outside of academia as a scientist, in that when you're in academia, you have so many moving parts that support you. And starting that in a lean startup mode is not really possible. So that's one thing that I would say the major issue and desire for ReImagine Science as an entity over many years now is to create the vehicle for helping that process happen. And we haven't figured it out yet, because it's such a big nut to crack.
Someone told me really early on when I was starting the business that it would be, so having your own business is like you have very little stress. And I feel very little stress in my life compared to when I was working or even consulting at the institution. But you work all the time. You work just an amazing number of hours. Like the number of Friday nights, Sunday mornings, weekends that I'm working is astronomical. But I find the life to not be very stressful.
Sometimes I think there's can be a tendency to have like a grass is always greener moment. And it's, having been on both sides of this, there's just going to be difficulty. And it's a matter of what difficulty suits who you are, the work you want to do in the world, where you are in your life stage and mental and emotional space, that some of these work scenarios fit for us at times of our lives and they don't at other ones. It was probably, coming back into academia hasn't just been the warm, cozy sitting by the campfire. And I would also say that being consulting on my own I had a very similar feeling to Hannah, that when the business was coming in and things were going well, it was really not stressful. I was able to take very good care of myself. The hard part there was the constant needing to have contracts coming in and sort of the insecurity of income and all of that, because I have a family. My daughter's 13. So there was a certain, the uncertainty of that was really challenging. But it's a matter of talking to people. I think for people thinking you can always do a side gig. There's nothing wrong with setting up a side gig. If your university allows you to, absolutely. Really easy. And it allows you to experiment quite safely and build before you leap. The link I put in the chat is to Stephanie Evergreen's program that she runs. And She's an evaluator. I've watched her over 15 years go from finishing her doctorate to running $1 million a year business. And she has a really wonderful framework to do it in a way that's sane and transitions from working full-time in an institution to heading out on your own, which if I had to do it over again, that's exactly what I'd do.
Well, we are right at 1 o'clock Eastern time. I want to say thank you to our 3 speakers and thank you to all of our participants for
you,
the
everyone.
engaging discussion. We'll see you next month for our next installment of our series. And be on the lookout for the recording, which will come in the email in the coming days.
Thank you, Christine and Christine.